Kia ora and welcome to this breakout session as part of the growing stream, Quiet Quitting and the Future of Work. I'm your facilitator for this session, Clarissa Hirst from the Financial Services Council, and I'm delighted to welcome Professor Jarrod Haar and James Fuller as speakers for this session today. So Jarrod's got 2 drinks in his hand, he's got a coffee and a lemonade. Welcome. So I'll just do some quick introductions and then after that we're going to do something a little bit differently with this session, so I hope you're all ready for a bit of interactive activity. First of all, Professor Jarrod Haar is a Professor of Human Resource Management at Auckland University of Technology. He researches employees and organisations. He's won industry and best paper awards as well as multiple research grants. In addition, he has over 400 refereed outputs, including 137 journal articles. Is that right, Jarrod?
139.
Oh.
This morning.
Correction, 139, and is a Fellow of the Royal Society of New Zealand, Te Aparangi. James Fuller on the other side. I think they've sat on opposite sides, and I'm going to be in the middle to mediate if there's any conflict. So we'll see how we go. James is the co-founder and CEO of Hnry. He spent the early part of his career as an application developer before moving into technology strategy and consultancy, where he held senior roles with firms such as Thomson Reuters and Deloitte. Having left the world of consultancy, he became an independent consultant, working with startups, corporate and government clients to help them drive scalable change using lean, agile and customer-focused principles. Now, being self-employed and having to deal with the burden of tax and financial admin led James and co-founder Claire to create a simple homemade system for calculating and paying their taxes. After a few friends asked to use the same thing, James and Claire created Hnry, a service designed to eliminate all financial admin for freelancers and contractors. Having launched in early 2017, Hnry has grown to become New Zealand's largest accountancy, helping tens of thousands of individuals to manage their self-employment, making it simple, affordable and accessible for anyone. So we'll undoubtedly have a very robust conversation today with some contrasting perspectives. We have the academic, the employer, the tech startup, the growing business, maybe the personal as well, which will make for a really, really good discussion. I encourage you all throughout the session to please use your mobile companion app, which you should all have access to via that link that was sent to your mobile and your email earlier. And I'll endeavour to get to as many questions as possible during the session. We've got our Q&A iPad is currently charging behind me, so I'm going to see how we go. If it's still taking its time, then I'll have to jump into the audience with a roving mic for the Q&A, but we'll see how we go. Right, so before we crack into the discussion, we're going to do something a little bit different. I know it's getting a little bit on in the day. Some of you have probably had early starts and you've been sitting for long periods of time. So we're going to get into a bit of a fun activity to kick things off. And we're going to play a little game called Heads or Tails. And it's very straightforward, I promise. It's not overly embarrassing, and it will help set the scene a little bit for some of the conversations that we're going to have over the next hour. So if I could ask everyone to please stand up. And James and Jarrod, you're free to participate if you'd like. No pressure, but you're welcome to. I'm hoping you'll do well at this, because you should know the answers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you all a series of questions, and there'll be 2 answers to each question. One is correct and one is incorrect. And I'm going to ask you to choose either heads or tails. And if you choose the heads option, pretty simple, just want you to put your hands on your head. Tails option, put your hands on your tails, bottoms. I will tell you which answer is correct, and if you're among those who got it right, please remain standing, and if you get it wrong, I'll ask you to sit down, and the aim is to be the last one standing at the end. Now, I don't have tons of questions, so we might end up with a few winners at the end, but we'll see again how we go. So we'll do a couple of quick trial questions just so you can get the idea, and these were submitted by Jarrod and James earlier. So test question number 1 is, what percentage of New Zealand's total tax revenue is paid via Hnry bank accounts? So the heads option is 0.1%, tails option is 1%. What percentage of New Zealand's total tax revenue is paid via Hnry bank accounts? 0.1%, 1%. All right. Everyone who has their hands on their head, please sit down. You are incorrect. All right, so the next question, another test question for you. This one was submitted by Jarrod. What percentage of New Zealand's total tax revenue is paid via Jarrod's pay-as-you-earn? Is it heads less than 0.0000001% or tails 0.1%? We're all watching it. If you've got your hands in your head, yeah, congratulations, you got it right. So, okay, I think we get the idea. So we might just get into the actual questions now. Thanks, guys, for submitting those. This is the real test now, so...
Stand up again?
Yeah.
Another life?
Yeah, okay, so I'm not sure what the prize is, by the way, but come and see me at the end if you win and I'll sort something out for you. Right. This is a test for all of you who were listening to Grant Robertson's speech earlier this morning, because he did mention this statistic. What is the current unemployment rate in Aotearoa, New Zealand? Heads is 2.3%, tails 3.3%. If you've got your hands on your head, you are incorrect. I'm sorry, it was 3.3%. All right, good, we're doing pretty well. According to new research by Gallup, approximately what percentage of American workers would be classified as quiet quitters? 25% or 50%? All right, if you've got your hands on your tails, well done, you're correct. Oh, that sorted a few people out. All right, next question. What percentage of New Zealand's workforce is made up of individuals who earn an income outside of permanent or fixed-term employment? 20% heads, 10% tails. Oh, well done, everyone, I think. You all got that one right. Let's see, we've got 2 more questions. So whoever's left standing after the next 2, you'll be our winners. According to the FSC's Financial Resilience Index, which was released earlier this year, it's another test for those of you who read our research, which of these generations worry more about their job security, or worried more at the time that we conducted the research? Gen Y, so that's young people aged 37 years and under, or baby boomers? 53 to 72, apparently. If you've got your hands on your tails, you are correct. Okay, final question. And Jarrod, if you get this wrong, I'm a bit worried. According to a study that Professor Jarrod Haar conducted with 1,000 New Zealanders, 25% of Pākehā, European New Zealanders, were at risk of burnout. 25%. What was the percentage for Māori? Was it 40% or 50%? 40% heads, 50% tails. I feel like you should wait till the end because everyone will just copy your answer. All right, so if you've got your hands on your head, you are incorrect, I'm sorry. It was 50% of Māori were at risk of burnout. Congratulations, I think we've got a couple of winners. Well done. All right, so thanks for playing that, everyone. Hopefully you just had a bit of fun, bit of a laugh, and learned a couple of handy facts as well in the process. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to join these two on the comfy seats and ask them a series of questions. I'll just go and check our Q&A iPad just to see how well charged it is, so just give me 30 seconds while I do that. Jarrod, do you want to just entertain the audience with a bit of singing while I'm doing that?
Sure. Actually, I was going to tell the winners, so just go out and find a table with a big jar full of chocolate, shove your hand in there, and when the ladies get a bit aggro, just say, no, I'm the winner from Crystal Room 1 or something, and you should be fine as long as you run fast. That would be my guess.
All right, can everyone hear me? Yep, okay. So the title of this session is Quiet Quitting and the Future of Work. So I thought we'd best start with the concept of quiet quitting, which has become quite the buzzword recently. Now just a show of hands, has anyone here watched the TV series Industry by any chance? Yep. Only a couple. Oh, okay, this reference, you may not get it then. But the two people who have watched it, it's a pretty intense show about a group of young finance graduates working at an investment firm in London. And it's a pretty grim show. Some of the things that they're expected to do, both within their working hours and outside of their working hours, are pretty intense, and it's pretty much the polar opposite to this whole notion of quiet quitting. So this idea was popularised on TikTok, became this sort of global phenomenon really, and it refers to employees that work within their specified hours and not beyond them. So really sticking to those work-life boundaries, something that I think got quite blurred for many of us during the pandemic. But is quiet quitting actually something new, or is it just another way of talking about the importance of work-life balance, or as some people have described it, just doing your job and going home afterwards? Jarrod, kia ora, what is your take on quiet quitting?
Kia ora. So I think we have to acknowledge first off that quiet quitting is a terrible term, right? There's no quitting in it. When I first heard quiet quitting, I went, is this like ghosting your employer where they say, hey, you haven't shown up. Yeah, I got a new job. Did I not tell you? Thanks for the pay, and I'm gone. And I actually thought that'd actually be quite cool. And that would actually fit with the Great Resignation, really giving it to your employer. So the quiet quitting, I went back to the first TikTok because I was asked to make some media commentary. And basically the guy, I think it was, said, I'm quietly quitting and I'm just not going to do anything extra that I have been doing for the last 4 years after hours, on the weekends, being promised promotions and not getting them, promised pay rises and not getting them. And I was like, yeah, fair enough, bro. That kind of feels actually quite a reasonable thing. But everybody just keeps saying, quiet quitting. And it's the quitting that's the problem, right? We're in the Great Resignation, and I think that's how that kind of TikTok term has really morphed into our current vernacular. I can't wait for it to die. Although the message behind it and he was a 25-year-old finance person or something like that, is that the expectations on me is to keep doing too much work after hours on weekends, and I don't get rewarded for it. I don't get promoted. I don't get the pay rise. And I was like, that's kind of fair enough. So I think it's a kind of human response. I don't know whether 4 years ago we would have cared so much. I think in the Great Resignation, where turnover is super high, people are kind of bringing that term in. But I don't know where. I just find the whole term just slightly, the quitting just puts me off. But I do lots of research on quitting, where people quit their jobs, not quit the after hours work. So to me, it's really about either work to rule, or i.e. doing my job, or just setting some boundaries. Because in my data, the burnout data, it's the younger workers who do burn out because they're trying to do everything, work too many hours. So it might be actually a positive response, in which case throwing that back onto the employer and challenging them to do better.
I love how you're looking at me like the employer. Yeah, we employ people. Factually correct. I'd be inclined to agree. I think that the problem with the idea of quiet quitting is that I agree, it's a horrible term, but it kind of sets the expectation that those people who are quite quiet quitting are doing so as a sort of a natural response to what has been, as you say, pretty difficult couple of years. People are trying to prioritize work-life balance. I think the challenge that we've got is that I think the term itself is now being so overused. Like, people are literally quiet quitting relationships. You know, it's become like this, the kind of like buzzword du jour of people who just don't want to do something anymore. Whereas I think, to your point, that the original intent of it was someone who was putting in more effort than they were being paid for and not being remunerated accordingly, which I think we could all agree, it sucks. You know, we've been talking to salaried members of staff for years now who are, as I once did when I was a management consultant. You wouldn't think that now because I'm wearing jandals every day of the year. But I once was a shiny-shoed management consultant with a tie and everything. But I was doing 55, 60 hours a week, but I was paid like I was doing 40 hours a week. And what you do as an individual when you do that is you undervalue your own salary. You're working 60 but being paid for 40. So if you look at what that actually does to your net hourly rate, this is why a lot of people are going into contracting and self-employment, because they're saying, well, if I'm working 60, why am I not getting paid for 60? So it's a really critical thing that actually everyone is remunerated fairly for the work that they do, and that actually work-life balance is an important thing. You know, a lot of people are leaving kind of large consultancy organizations because they are burning out, and they're getting to the point where the expectations of their time are far too great. So I think I agree with the principle of actually people should be remunerated fairly for the work that they do. But I think quiet quitting is a nasty term that's being kind of co-opted by a whole bunch of other people for other reasons, rather than just like, I'm not getting remunerated. It's actually been co-opted by a bunch of people who are there going, I want to really like get one over on my employer, so I'm just not going to do as much as they're expecting me to do. And that's called quiet quitting. Whereas actually, you know, what I think the intent was just doing the work that I'm paid to do.
We've had a question come through from Julian. What's the difference between quiet quitting and what used to be known as work to rule? And I know you mentioned that earlier, Jarrod. Do you want to take that question?
Yeah, Hello. So I don't think there's much difference there at all. But work to rule does not a TikTok video make. That would be my brutal honesty on it. Because when I first started, I thought, oh wow, people quiet quitting. And then I was like, I do have to say, I have New Zealand data, and I've looked at the way people do what we call extra role behaviours. The extra, will you come in and do something for the organised? Yes, I'll do it. Not everybody does it. And those levels have plummeted from the first 2 years. So 2020, 2021 and May this year, they've dropped significantly. And so I was like, wow, go figure. They're actually... So I do think quiet quitting is occurring, but I also think there's good reason for it. So I don't think there is a lot different between work to rule and quiet quitting, other than one is a far more popular term than the other.
Well, hang on. I mean, just not to completely counterpoint it, but I think work to rule is that the inference there is I'm literally only going to do the bare minimum. And I don't think that was the intent of quiet quitting. I think, again, they're kind of being conflated together. I think work to rule is, is a term that we haven't heard for quite a while, which is effectively people saying, well, it's almost the sort of malicious compliance of doing a job. Whereas I think the original intent from quiet quitting was really more about I'm not going to go over and above. So I think, work to rule was less about going over and above and more about just literally just show up, do it, go home.
Yeah, I do agree with that. And I think instead of working after hours 5 days a week, I still might do it 1 or 2 days a week, right? I still might go to that one event, but I'm probably going to say, yeah, my boss has emailed me at 7 o'clock and I'm not going to respond until tomorrow now. So I do agree. And we're not seeing workers now just like 5 o'clock, I'm out the door, forget it. No emails, that one. I think we're still, and we will have this core part of the workforce who are still doing all those wonderful behaviours that employers benefit from, because you don't have to pay me to do stuff. My boss is forever, writing me for saying, why are you answering an email on a Saturday? And I'm like, this is how I spend my Saturday mornings, because I like what I do, right? I like my job, I have lots of freedom. But at least she's always trying to reset those boundaries to say, I don't expect you to reply to this. And so I think that's a very good point. So there isn't that industrial relations notion. Probably what we should say instead of quiet quitting is I'm just sticking to my 9 to 5, because I am there. And this is the thing, right? These will be the high performing workers in particular And now they're just saying, actually, I keep giving you all this extra work and I'm going to burn out. And that's not good for the organisation or me. So I'm just going to stick to what I should be doing. And I think that's a fair call.
Okay, I've got another question. Has quiet quitting been brought on by changing attitudes towards work, at least in part due to COVID lockdowns, the high demand for employees with the low unemployment rate, or something else?
I think, in our experience, I think, everyone who kind of came through COVID and was sort of working from home actively, I think we all felt that bleed in our home life, which was 5 o'clock was not the time that you left the office and had a physical separation. 5 o'clock, you just kind of came and went. And you'd still be there at 5:25, sitting in front of your laptop doing stuff. And, I experienced it in our house that it actually, my wife and I run Hnry together, but, literally we would be working, kids would go to bed, we'd get back on and carry on working because there's no physical separation. So I think there's a bit of a response to the fact that everyone has been going over and above. But I think what's been really interesting is that would we be in this situation of quiet quitting if people were being adequately remunerated for the additional hours that they put in? Which is what I love about the freelance and contract market, is when people are doing extra hours, they are remunerated for those hours. Yes, there are risks of burnout, and it's a very real thing. But if a tradie is working 6 days a week to gain the extra income to feed their family, are we worried about, if they're being remunerated accordingly? We're not too worried about that because they're making a conscious choice to do it and they're being remunerated. Whereas I think in the sort of salary world of work, it's very difficult to imagine a situation where you can get paid overtime. I think everyone in this room, those of you who got up very early to get on flights, I'm sure you wouldn't suddenly charge the company extra money for the 2 hours you had to get up early this morning to get on a plane. But I think we're seeing a direct response to people worrying more about their own work-life balance, but also starting to question their own, almost their own kind of internal barometer of how fair the remuneration is for the work that they're doing. And, I'd like to see more organizations think more about what a sensible work-life balance is and where people are working outside of that to make sure that they're remunerated accordingly, whether that's with time and a half for work done at weekends, not just the odd email, Jarrod, you can't get away with that, but really to make an effort to make sure that staff have good work-life balance, because that's just a positive thing for every organization.
What do you say to those professional services firms who openly state at the outset to grads, you are expected to work beyond the stipulated hours? And as an employer, James, do you want to take this one?
As a professional services employer, we do the opposite. And one of our big things is, we say everyone works hard and we go home on time, and I'll walk around the office at 5 o'clock and kick people out. Just because I don't think it's a good thing that people are there in the evenings. But having been on the other side of the coin, I was one of those workers working at a Big Four consulting firm where the expectation was that you stayed in the office until whichever partner you were trying to impress went home, and then you could go. And I think that the problem is that in a lot of cases, you're staying late or doing that stuff to be seen. To be seen to be working late so that you can get ahead. And I think we need to reset the expectations. I actually see it personally as a sign of inefficiency if people aren't able to get the work done in the hours that are available. So I think we need to stop setting the expectation that people will work 60-hour weeks, and that shouldn't be a way of getting ahead. But I look at the professional services organizations, and it's still the same now as it was 15, 20 years ago. It's still the same expectation that you will do hugely long hours.
James, just picking up that efficiency comment. There's a question here from Elena, sorry if I've pronounced that wrong. Could it be the case that we are working longer hours because we are tired and inefficient and it takes us longer to get things done? In other words, if we were not tired, we would be able to get things done between 9 and 5?
Yeah, I agree. I think efficiency is a huge driver of it, and I think people are tired. I think, someone said to me yesterday, the reason we have quiet quitting is everyone's just over it. Everyone's just over it. After COVID, everyone's just like, I'm done with stuff now. I just need a bit of me time. But I agree with you. I think there's huge inefficiencies in the way people are working that means that they can't get what they need to done. I have conversations with our staff all the time about the prevalence of half-an-hour meetings. I just can't stand meetings. I like people getting together and working together and being in a room and achieving something. But the idea that we have to get 6 people in a room to decide something is just madness. And what that means is everyone has to try and work harder outside of that to make up for the time when they all just sat in a meeting room having a chit-chat. And I think everyone here has been in those meetings. Someone bought me a mug once that said, that said that meeting could have been an email. And it's like, it's so true. It's like we're all working in this thing where, particularly post-COVID, everyone just likes to have a bit of a yarn and a get-together, but it means we're all struggling to find the time outside of that to actually get work done.
Can I make a comment on that? So I have New Zealand data, and at the moment I think the workforce is still about 3 times higher on being burnt out risk, on that high level of burnout risk. So that's as of May, and that's actually an improvement from December last year, where it was like about 4 times. So I do think that the workforce is exceptionally tired and fatigued. And I say to people, well, you know, when we see burnout rates internationally are being talked about like never before, it's because of COVID. And people rightfully go, no, stop blaming COVID. And I just think, yeah, but it is the common denominator, right? We have, you know, I don't even know when we got out of, you know, when they removed the traffic light, I was personally like, I don't even know what colour we were at. And we've stopped, you know, and we've stopped the traffic light. I was just like, oh my God, you know, just totally over it. And yet there is still COVID cases. You know, we still have this thing there. So I think employers in particular need to realise that the workforce is still struggling. And my other New Zealand data, because I'm a personal meeting hater, I once said to my boss, he said, Jarrod, you weren't at the meeting today. And I said, Dave, it's death by meeting. It's death by meeting. And I quit a couple of months later because he wanted meetings.
Loudly or quietly?
No, I said it to his face, and he actually was like, and got quite scared and ran away. And then I did quit. So, because it was just like meetings every day, and they got longer and longer. And I was like, we literally go to meetings to get more work and have less time to do it in. And my New Zealand data says if you have lots of meetings, workers' job satisfaction drops, and that's the biggest predictor of job performance. So I'm a big fan of people say, what are you... Oh, when I did the 4-day work week research, which does come into kind of resetting things, one team I had said they had a 2-hour meeting every week and they managed to drop it to 30 minutes a fortnight. And why? Because they were given the freedom to control, you know, to control the time. So, I mean, and there is actually research out there talking about organisations having no meetings, you know, maybe 1 meeting a month, and finding huge productivity gains because people go and meet and talk over coffee and then go and do their work, rather than go to a meeting, socialise, talk about doing some work, and then walk out going, what happened to that? 2 hours wasted. So yeah, not a fan of meetings.
No more meetings. Got it. Right, question for you, James. One of the questions that we covered in that intro activity revealed that 20%, so 1/5 of New Zealanders earn an income outside of fixed-term permanent employment. In other words, they're contracting or they're freelancing, either, you know, just on its own, or maybe they're doing that on top of a full-time job. I know I've done that, I still do. And these are the people that Hnry caters to, right? So is this 20%, I mean, we love to throw in statistics and percentages, but just delving a bit deeper, is that something that's been on the rise? Like, are you noticing that more and more Kiwis are turning to these more sort of non-traditional ways of working? What's sort of the trend there?
Yeah, I think it's what we saw, if we're not to kind of harp everything onto COVID, because I think it is a sort of milestone that we can all identify with. But when COVID started, there were a lot of organizations that had kind of over-resourced in the preceding years. They'd brought on a huge amount of permanent staff. They were quite bloated. And as soon as COVID hit, unfortunately, these organizations took the opportunity to make a lot of staff redundant. Obviously, some of them went on to not need the wage subsidy after all, but it was a good opportunity for a lot of people to clean house. And what we found is a number of the people who were displaced, who were former salaried members of staff. We tend not to use the word permanent because there's no such thing as a permanent job anymore. It's very much your one restructure away from being out. A lot of these people said, hang on a minute, I've spent most of my career as a bit of a slave to a single employer, as a single income stream. And so people started to want to look ahead and say, how do I de-risk my income? How do I look and find out the best way of earning that isn't so tied to putting my eggs in one basket? And so self-employment and having a kind of portfolio career, whilst it was relatively common in some areas, and there are complete industries in the global market that are all self-employed people. A lot of people who wouldn't have traditionally considered self-employment or contracting or freelancing actually looked at it as an opportunity and said, I can de-risk the way that I earn. I can actually run my income and my earnings like a portfolio, like you would with a share portfolio, and say, I'm going to dial up and down the skills that make the most sense at the time when they're in highest demand. So I might be a graphic designer that can do a bit of web design, I might do some illustrations, and whilst my core business right now is doing, I don't know, children's books, what I do on the side is I have a little e-commerce store where I sell some things, or I maybe drive Uber or whatever they might be doing. And what that means they can do is dial up and down those different income streams as the opportunity arises, rather than having a single employer and a single kind of source of income. And we have seen a lot of the sort of trend towards people wanting to take more control, and quiet quitting is a good opportunity for people to take control. And it has been on the rise. It's not as non-traditional as people may necessarily think, but it's certainly seen an acceleration, particularly with remote working as well, where people are saying, why do I have to sit in this one office with one employer when I could work across 3 different clients, some of them remotely, some of them in person? And it's fascinating to see the shift in many different industries of people thinking about the different ways of earning as a way of de-risking their career.
Jarrod, is there a risk from an employer's perspective, do you think, in terms of the rise of this portfolio career and people kind of taking on more of this work that is, I won't use non-traditional, but
Thank you.
Alternative or other ways of working that are becoming
It's
more
normal.
common?
Yeah, I think that the trick behind them, well, the thing we should recognise with employers is this is their choice. They have made, used to be my father's generation, it used to be employment for life. You start your job, like Japan used to be. You could stay there the whole time and retire. And I think if your contribution to Toyota, enjoy your retirement. And, we had all these kind of big changes in the labour market in the 80s. And as you say, we are one restructure away from a new career or a new employer. So I think we've had that sitting there on workers, right? Workers feel that pressure. And so I think, employers, you could make a niche in the market by being a permanent, a forever employer, but there's probably no guarantee that you'll stay in business that long anyhow. So it's kind of a chicken and an egg thing, but I don't think there's much employers can do about it, because they are the ones who have embraced this for the last, 2 or 3 decades. And that's why, if employers were complaining about the quiet quitting, I'd be like, well, if you're giving them all this extra work or, great resignation, I keep saying, 20% of New Zealand employers are fabulous. You don't have anything really to worry about. You might get a little trickle of turnover. But if you're a poor employer and you pay poorly and you give us poor...
What are you doing there? You're pointing at me for that.
I'm pointing
calling out my employment practices.
I'm pointing to you because you said that earlier, not your company.
Is this being recorded? This is why we're sitting on opposite sides, Jarrod.
Who wouldn't? I'd rather work with the Jandals myself. That'd be... I was saying that's more my dress code outside of work. Actually, that's my working from home one. Have you ever had one of those Zoom meetings and you put your collared shirt on over your shorts and your jandals, right? And you're like, oh yes, I'm a professor. I look really organised. And then the meeting finishes and you take your thing on, you get your singlet on, and you're like, man, was that stinking hot? So I think that's just a reaction to the workplace. So I think good employers tell your workers that you love them, pay them well, as you mentioned, the paying them well. And you won't have too much to worry about. I think that's the reality. But as I like to remind the New Zealand employers, my data would say 20% do this really flippin' well. Not 50%, 20%. And there's at least 20 or 30 at that bottom end, right? And they're the ones who aren't here because they just don't care. So if you're more in that middle, if you've got high turnover, if you think you've got a lot of quiet quitting going on, look internally. What's your culture like? How do we pay people? How do we encourage them to not burn out?
James, what are some of the strategies that you've employed? So as we talked about this sort of interesting tension that you experience as due to, the nature of Hnry being this business that caters to freelancers and contractors, but then at the same time, your business is now growing and expanding into Australia, and you're probably experiencing your own staff wanting to do some of these things and maybe start their own businesses. Like, how do you manage that?
Yeah, I think we're in a bit of a weird position, really, because we have, 70 staff now between Australia and New Zealand. So one of the things that we've had to be really deliberate about is about how do you build culture where, as I was saying earlier, you don't have an expectation that people are going to work past 5 o'clock, and that everyone genuinely works hard, goes home on time. So there is the sort of the work-life balance, there's a remuneration. As a business, I've got to say, we leverage the freelance, the contingent economy quite a lot, whether that's for videography or graphic design. We have our own customers who come and work for us, which is great. We love to be able to do that for our industries. And I think we're one of those employers that takes the approach to our people that is less about going, these ones are salaried and these ones are contract, and saying, well, these ones work 2 days a week and these ones work full time. And I always use our graphic designer, Tracy, as an example here, because, I mean, she's phenomenally talented, and we could not employ her on a full-time basis, not least because she wouldn't want to be, but also we don't have enough work for a graphic designer for 5 days a week. But actually we get far more value out of the fact that Tracy works across 3 or 4 clients, she gets experiences in different areas, she brings those experiences to our business the 2 days a week she does work for us, and it's a perfect model. And so I think what we're seeing is progressive organizations are moving towards ways of employment that mix a hybrid of salaried and contingent workers, and not in a sort of a separatist way, but literally saying, we have various needs for short-term resources. We're going to leverage contractors and freelancers to do that. And it's an interesting development that I think the employment practices are quite behind the times versus things like if you go out and buy some software and you need to go and have 5 extra users. That doesn't mean you need to go and procure 5 extra machines to put into your basement somewhere as servers. You literally just add 5 users with your SaaS product, and it is on demand. And you basically flex what you need from your resources, whether they're technical resources or infrastructure. You flex what you need as you need it. And yet, so many organizations look at resourcing and say, we have to hire salaried people. We have a project coming up for 12 months. We need a salaried person. And then what happens is the project finishes after 12 months and they go, what are we going to do with that business analyst? That project's finished. Where are we going to put them? And it's really, we talk to a lot of employers about encouraging them to take a more flexible approach to their resourcing, that idea of dynamic resourcing, to say you will always need a core of salaried staff, but how do you supplement them as and when you need them with people who are going to bring new skills into your business, new experiences, who are going to benefit your existing staff members? And I think that's kind of what we do as an organization, what we're promoting, is to actually have people have healthy conversations about what is the right employment model for a particular role. Is it short-term contract freelance, or is it someone who we need on a salary for a full-time basis?
I'd like to ask for your thoughts on the brain drain, and this fear that many young Kiwis in particular are going to be leaving New Zealand, going overseas, in the near future now that we're sort of opening up again or have opened up. What are your thoughts on that, Jarrod? Again, is the brain drain, there are a lot of catchphrases around this topic, and is that an actual thing? What does your research tell us?
So it is. I believe that, because I just heard this, might have even been this week, I think it's the net migration loss was 12,000 people. How many of those are brains? I bet quite a few of them. I actually, on one of your organisation's podcasts or webcasts, I said, if you're a nurse and you can go to Brisbane and earn 20 or 30 grand more and house prices are $300,000 less, you should go. And somebody said to me, ooh, you're promoting. And I was like, no, if that was my friend or my child, I'd say, why would you stay here in Auckland? It's too flippin' expensive. I think, we've got to sometimes, what was New Zealand famous for the last kind of 20 years? A low income economy. Can't now say, oh, we're losing talent. I just kind of feel like, you've created this system where workers haven't been paid sufficiently. When you go to Australia and you have, and I'm talking about 15 years ago, you get people paid, 50% more than our minimum wage 20 years ago because they're working double time on a Sunday and things like that. It's just totally different economy. So I do think two things. One is, we have to wear it because we think we've enjoyed it. Maybe some profit makers have enjoyed it. I don't think the workforce has enjoyed it. But the other thing, the good news is the brain drain will come back, right? It'll be a brain gain at some stage. And guess what? I'll come back having worked in Sydney or Melbourne and have some unique skills, or worked up in Cairns in the outback or something like that, and I'll have unique skills that perhaps work in other remote areas of New Zealand. So I think we should, we should shrug our shoulders when people say, I'm leaving. Yes, we should be disappointed, but I can see why people want to go. I think we have to be a bit more pragmatic.
I'm going to agree with you, Jarrod. Don't worry. Haven't people always left, just thinking about it, wasn't it a staple of the culture pre-COVID that young people would go and do their OE? And did we consider that a brain drain? Because actually those people who went and did their OE, I know my wife left here and went on her OE, and she had 5-10 years in the UK where she unfortunately met me and picked me up and dragged me here. I was kicking and screaming the whole way, by the way. But I think that is... It probably was considered at the time a brain drain. She'd recently graduated from university. She'd had some jobs here. She left, she went overseas. I wonder how many people, maybe by a show of hands, who've left New Zealand in their 20s and worked overseas and came back. There's probably a few of you who've kind of been on that journey. But did we consider it a brain drain then? But actually post-COVID, again, buzzwords, we kind of look at it and go, well, that's a massive brain drain because everyone's flooding fleeing the country because the borders are open. And I think putting it into perspective, hasn't it always been the case that that's been a net positive overall for New Zealand? Is people getting wider experience in other countries and then bringing that home?
Yeah, and I do think the data says New Zealanders are the most widely populated across the globe. So by proportion of population, there are more Kiwis working overseas than any other nationality in the world. So we're right up there with spreading ourselves out. And if people want to move to Australia and stay there, good luck with the rugby team. But I think
I'm Australian, Jarrod, so just be careful what you say.
I'm glad I didn't make any comments then. I would say we had a young guy who came to us who was, if any of you have been involved in the Summer of Tech program, tech grads coming in and working for sort of a few months. We employed our Summer of Tech grad, fantastic guy, real talent. And he came on sort of midway through one of the COVID lockdowns when we were allowed out of the house. And unfortunately, when it started to get to earlier this year, when things were opening back up, he'd always been talking about going on his OE, so we knew he had a bit of a stay of execution whilst the borders were shut. But he got approached by a German company to come over and work over there. Now, it might not have been as exciting work as doing tax at Hnry, automating it, might I say. But it was the experience that he wanted was going overseas. And I remember having to say to him, you always have a job here. Like, we know that people are going to go overseas. We know they're going to have a great experience. It's our responsibility as employers to make sure that when they go overseas, they go, oh, I really enjoyed working at Hnry. And I know I've got a job there that I can go back to because I know I was respected and remunerated and I had the opportunity. But we know people are going to go. We had a guy join us who came back from the UK, having done his OE. He was a very senior engineering resource. Joined us, and within 2 months, he said to me, I've got a startup idea. I feel like I need to quit my job here and pursue it. Now, what could I say other than we will back you 100% doing that, because both Claire and I did that. We jacked in our jobs. We went unpaid to start Hnry back in 2018, and it worked out very well for us. But we couldn't say anything different to a young guy who had an idea and wanted to pursue it. So I sat him down and I said, well, whatever you need from us in terms of support, in terms of introductions, whether that's to investors or others, and you still have a job here. And that's what we need to be a bit more cognizant of as employers, because this is not once the door shuts, we're done here. It's actually, we want to encourage people to go and experience other things and bring that back to the economy and bring that value back with them.
Can I just add on to that one? So boomerang employees is the other thing we've heard predominantly out of the States, but that's the workers who leave, especially if they, recognise the great resignation. Here's my opportunity, and they go over the fence and the grass is dead and it wasn't green after all. And then, 4 to 6 months later, they're like, please take me back. Employers by all means can say no, but if you have this kind of smart, savvy, open door, he might go to Germany and never come back. But he might go, actually, Germany was fun for 2 years and I've got it out of my blood, but now I want to come back. He's not going to come back and say, can you give me a letter of reference? He's going to knock on Hnry's door and say, can you give me a job? I'll look to stay here 6 months while I sort out what I'm going to do. And you've got some talent there knocking on your door, and then he stays for years. So I think this is the new way for employers. You've got to be open because it is win-win. This is the thing, right? It is a win-win event if you can keep your doors open and have a revolving door. You don't obviously want people flying in and out all the time, but because maybe the second time you'd say, hey, I think you need to go and learn a different lesson than using me. But I think the first boomerang return is a good option.
All right, so we've got about 10 minutes left. So if anyone does have any additional questions, please send them through so that I can try and get to them before the end. We've had a couple of questions come in on a similar topic, so I might try and sort of merge them together. Work from home, or WFH, the acronym has blurred the lines between home and work. What are your thoughts on whether that's good or bad? How do we right the balance? What's the ideal ratio between working from home versus working in the office versus something else? What are your thoughts?
I think our big ethos on this is that everyone's a grown-up, and we understand that people have times when they want to be in the office, they've got times when they want to be at home. I think every conversation that we have with our staff is all around the flexibility going both ways. I interviewed a candidate for our Sydney office the other day, and almost within the first 5 minutes of the interview, the first thing he said was, I will never come to an office ever again. And that is not someone we want working in our organization. And it's, we're a collaborative organization. We work well together as a team. We're a very fast scaling business. And people who are always at home will get left behind. And that's not because they're working fewer hours. That's just because they are not going to be in the right place at the right time to help the business when it needs them. They're always going to be behind a computer screen, on Slack, behind an instant message. Having said that, we have people who, for whether it's transport reasons or whether it's looking after family members, they have to work from home time to time. And that's absolutely fine. We live in a digital economy where we can have people connected. But there are times when it's great to have everyone in the office. And so we always have a kind of a fairly flexible policy with our staff. We don't want to get to the point where everyone has a mandated day that they work from home, because then you kind of just lose a whole bunch of that opportunity. But you have to, from our perspective as employers, we've had to realize that everybody's a grown-up. And that means that sometimes people have to wait in for people at home. And that doesn't make them any less productive, and they're going to be online. But we have to realize that, because that line blurred so much whilst everyone was in lockdown, coming back out of that, we've got to be cognizant of the fact that people got used to a different way of working. And now it's our opportunity as employers to say, how do we make our work environment the place that people want to come into? And so what are the activities you can be doing? And we have board games in the office, and people play board games at lunch. We have Wine and Cheese Wednesdays. I would thoroughly recommend that. That's always good. We have team social things that are not that are just like get-togethers where we put on a lunch, like a sushi lunch for everybody. And it's a great thing that people want to be in a collaborative working environment. If you make a horrible work environment where everyone's in cubicles and no one speaks, no one's going to come in. They're going to want to work at home. Whereas if you have a fun organization where people actually want to come in and use their passion, people will come into the office. And that's what we found. First day that lockdown was lifted, all of our staff came into the office because they'd missed seeing each other and they'd missed collaborating. So 25, 30 people all came in. And that's what we're trying to create, is an atmosphere that people want to be a part of, not an atmosphere where people are desperately trying to stay on their own, in their house, with a shirt on and no pants.
I bet you it's not cask wine, on that wine and cheese.
It is not cask wine.
So I have New Zealand data. At the moment, I think we're tracking about 42%, so less than 50% working in the office 5 days a week. So if your staff is in the office 5 days a week, you're in the minority. That would be what my data's saying. Hybrid work is a big chunk, 40-odd%, and that's doing or might be even slightly higher. That's doing like 2 to 3 days a week, and I do kind of agree. I think if I was going to mandate anything, it would be, Wednesdays. It would be a lovely day for everybody to come in. You could mandate an in-the-office day, but I don't think mandating... If you're going to embrace hybrid working, let your workers work it out. Because if I'm working from home today and I'm in the groove and you say, I expect you in the office tomorrow, and I'm like, I can really make serious progress tomorrow in my, in my shirt, in my singlet and shorts in front of the laptop. That's good for everybody to let me do that. My only caveat is the 5 day a week. There are people working 5 days a week from home. So your example was a great one. It was about 9%, 8 to 9%. They've got the worst burnout rate, the highest quit rate, the highest loneliness, the highest work demands perceptions, because they cannot separate work and family at 5 days a week. And if you think about it, when we were doing lockdown, I'm sure we were all just blurring things in, right? I'd literally get up to make dinner to remind myself that the day was kind of at an end and it was time. And sometimes dinner was 5 o'clock and sometimes it was 7 o'clock. And I'd just be thinking, man, they just blur in. But we were all walking around looking for teddy bears and stuff like that. It was a little, it was a kind of fun little time. Today, though, I think, if you have workers working exclusively remotely, I would do two things. One is I would mandate them to come back into the office, but I would also say, hey, look, if you can meet up with some colleagues, and if you're up north, meet in Silverdale for lunch or something 1 or 2 days a week, get them to get out of home. I think it's just breaking that home, because then once I'm in front of the laptop, the day just kind of blurs. And so the 5 day a week, as my data would say, that they have the worst outcomes.
And I'm really conscious of time, and you and I, Jarrod, we could just talk all week about this. But the last thing is just a comment that I heard from someone very recently who was looking at their organization where everyone primarily worked from home. And it was the 5 days a week work from home. And I remember them saying to me, why am I paying Auckland prices for people who I'm never going to see and never collaborate with, when actually with a globally distributed workforce, I don't have to pay a premium to employ someone in Auckland that I'm never going to see? Why don't I find other people around the world at a different price point? And that was a really worrying thing. As you go, actually, are we sleepwalking into a situation where, number one, other economies are poaching resources from here? The US and Australia are already dipping their hands into the New Zealand job market and allowing people to work remotely. But for us, a lot of people are saying, well, actually, where's our equivalent? Where do we go and dip into for all the remote workers? And I think we've all got to have a think about, if we all abandon our cities and go and work at home, what does that mean in a few years' time in terms of the job market? Are we all going to have to work remotely because local employers will have decided that they're going to employ remotely?
All right, we've got 3 minutes and 30 seconds on the timer. So, final question for you both before we break for afternoon tea, which I'm sure everyone is looking forward to. And we'll try and keep it to a short summary if we can. What do you think? You're laughing.
I don't think short summary has ever been something associated with Aotearoa, but that's fine.
So, see how you go. What do you think work will look like in Aotearoa in 2050? What other changes or trends are coming that employers and employees should prepare for?
4 day week. That's it, 4 day week. I've done it.
That's a good mic drop. I think, just to my previous point, I think we're going to see a lot more kind of hybrid working where people are going to be working far more flexibly across multiple employers, and that becomes the norm. I think we'll probably see a bit of a death to single employer relationships, because I just think that's not what people want, and that's actually not good for employers either.
Got 2 minutes and 20 seconds.
It's never happened. Yes, what was your question? You might have to shout.
Same question, but what my experience is, and I love your comment on this, is that
Yeah, I think it's a really great question. So for the benefit of anyone who didn't hear, it was how do we, given the fact that a lot of young people coming into work want to be in the office, whereas perhaps those who are a bit sort of further along in their careers are more comfortable at home. I think it, genuinely is about sort of being able to provide a work environment where it doesn't feel like a chore to come in, it doesn't feel a distraction. And I think, the one thing that we did at Hnry quite a while ago, a suggestion from one of our, at the time, most junior members of staff, was around meetings, my personal bugbear. And a lot of the reason that people who are further along in their career want to work from home is because they find themselves in meetings a lot more. And so we made a rule, which is internal meetings only happen in the morning between 9 and 12. No internal meetings in the afternoon, which means that actually because everyone then has less time to sit in meetings, they start to prioritize which meetings do I actually need to be in. And we kind of established a bit of a culture of saying no to meetings. And what that means is our more, the sort of more kind of mature people in their career are going, well, actually now I can be productive all afternoon because I've not been pulled into meetings with everything else. So I think it's establishing those practices that might be unique to you that really encourage people back into the office.
9 to 12. I was waiting for him to say like 9 to 10, and I was going to be like, yeah, mentoring Mondays or something like that. That's what I'd suggest. I'd say, look, let's make a day a week where we're expecting new colleagues who are just starting off, still trying to figure things out, to drain the brains of those in the organisation who have all the experience and wisdom, and encourage them to share it and say, this is a great thing for you, right, to mentor new employees. And so I think it's just making a conscious choice, but it is a great suggestion, and I have seen literature that says those new employees do want to be in the last 3 seconds. They do want to be in and talking to people, so encourage it.
All right. Unfortunately, we have run out of time for today's session, but we are about to break for afternoon tea, and I'm sure James and Jarrod will be sticking around at least for a few minutes. So if anyone does have any questions, you can probably chat to them in the break.
Short answers only. I would just like to thank Clarissa for the fantastic moderation. It's not easy dealing with Jarrod and I on the stage, so thank you so much for inviting us and moderating.
Thank you, everyone.